songwriting time, where we learn to combine melody and harmony, rhythm and rhyme. So come on, let's go. It's a songwriting show for course code MUS310. Okay, welcome back to episode 2 of MUS310, the songwriting show. It is great to be back with you guys. This is coming to you from Caronport, or as we call it now, Quaranport. And it's a bright, sunny afternoon. You can tell that it's sunny because the sun is shining in from my window and leaving this mark of little sunshine bubbles down my shirt. What can you do? You just got to adapt and press on and do your best. Today, I want to talk to you about two concepts that you can use to create melodies that are memorable and interesting. And that is, number one, motivic development. We've talked about that a little bit. And number two is ending your phrases on a chord tone and how important that is to end your phrases on a note that's going to sound good, it's going to sound pleasing, that's going to sound resolved with the chord that is being played. So let's start off by reminding you guys a little bit about motifs. So in some of the literature, you'll see some people refer to motif as a motive. Those people are wrong. A criminal has a motive. Songwriters have motifs. Okay? Why would you say motive when you can say motif? Motif, much cooler sounding. So I'm glad we cleared that up. A motif is just a small, memorable melodic figure. It can be really small, and we can do things to it to develop it. Again, the example I mentioned in class before, the ultimate example of motivic development is the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth. But we use that in songwriting all the time. That little motif becomes like a character in the story that we follow through the rest of the melody, and we do different things to it. We can move it up and down pitch-wise. We can rearrange the melody. We can expand the intervals. We can compress the intervals. We can stretch it out in time. We can compress it in time. We can place that motif in different locations in the bar. We can start it on one. We can start it on the end of two. Anywhere we want, we can do these things with our motif. And the ear remembers these things, and it makes our melodies sound interesting. And once you learn to look for that and listen for that in songs, you'll see that it's everywhere. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. I mean, that motif is repeated with just a little change the second time. It's just transformed that second time. We are used to that. That's sort of how we communicate in music, is with these series of memorable motifs. If there's nothing sort of memorable and repeatable and familiar in your song, then the listener is just going to be completely bewildered by your melody. So you're going to want those little figures that are going to be recognizable, those characters that are going to repeat in the story that you're telling through your melody. So that is a little review of motifs and motivic development. And now I want to talk about how when we move those motifs around, it's important that we resolve them to a chord tone in the chord that we're playing in that part of the song. So an example of this, let's take our favorite chord progression, the old 1-5-6-4. Approximately 1 million songs have been written to that progression, and I'm playing it in the greatest key ever invented, the key of G. And let's take a little motif, and our motif is just going to be this. Just a note will go down one step and then back up to that step. And I'm going to play it in such a way that every time we play it, it resolves to a chord tone. So on G, I'm just going to play it like this. And then when we play D, So what I've done is I just took that motif and I'm playing it on the root of the chord. So on this G chord, I'm playing G. I'm going down one step in the G major scale. You hear that? Da da da, da da da, da da da, da da da. Now what I did with I just moved the motif along with the chord movement. Now, what I ended up with was my little figure resolved every time to that chord tone, but that's kind of boring if your motif just follows the bass line exactly. So one thing you can do with your motif is you can move it around, but you can be lazy. And by lazy, I mean you move it the minimum distance along the scale, the minimum distance, so that it still resolves. Okay? So let's try again. I'm just going to move it down the minimum number of steps that I can to have it still resolve. So it will sound like this. Now it's a D chord. Now I can play it on an F sharp. F sharp is in the D major triad, and that resolves. And then and then the next step down is an E, and it's an E minor chord, so that works. And then when we get to the C, well, I'm on the E, and E is the third of the C major triad, so I can just stay there. So it sounds like this. Da, 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 da. So that's a little more interesting. And when the melody is doing one thing and the bass line is doing something else, that's a little more interesting to our ears, and we enjoy that a little bit more. Okay, that's a really simple example of a really short, just a 3-note motif. Let's take a motif, a phrase that's a little bit longer. Let's take the example from the song Where Is Love that we talked about a few weeks ago in class. So you'll remember that motif sounded like this. So da 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 da. So that motif, and the interesting thing about that for us with the progression that we're using is that that motif lasts across 2 bars. So it's going to start during one chord and it's going to finish during the next chord. So when we use this motif, we want to make sure that the last couple notes, that the last note is a chord tone for the chord that we're landing on. So if we started in bar 1, that next note is going to be in the 2nd bar. So we need to pick a chord tone from the D chord. So we can land it on an A and then it'll work. So our motif the first time around becomes. And the next chord is E minor. We'll start it again. We can start at the same place. And then the next chord is a C. So we need to end it on a G, a C, or an E. Let's end it on a C. So here we're ending up with this da 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 da. So there's an example of motivic development of a phrase that's a little more complicated and that stretches across 2 bars. Okay, so the main thing for you guys to remember is when you have your melodic motif, that little melodic figure that might be the hook in your chorus or whatever that is, when you are moving it around, when you are transforming it, the key to making that transformation work is to have the final note of that motif be a chord tone in the chord that's being played at that time. You can, whatever you're doing with your motif, if you're displacing it pitch-wise or time-wise, if you're stretching it, compressing it, if you're elongating it, or whatever you're doing with it, the key is to make sure that it resolves to a chord tone. Then it will sound satisfying, then it will sound credible, It'll be fun to sing. It'll feel good. Those are the things that you want. So your assignment, what I want you to do with this is to look at the song that you are writing and look for the motifs that you have. And I'm sure that you have these. You do it intuitively, but look for those, recognize those, and see if there are ways that you can move that motif around in your melody to make it more interesting and to make sure that you're resolving it on a chord tone. Most of you do this intuitively because if you resolve it on a chord tone, it sounds good. You know it sounds good, and you're doing the things that sound good to your ears right now. But understanding the principle of this is going to help you find more creative ways to develop your melodies. Now, I know this is not an ideal way to teach this. It'd be so much better if we could be together in the classroom doing this on the keyboard, showing you, answering your questions. So as a reward for slugging it out and making it to the end of this video, I want to bring this feature to you that I call Pictures from My High School Yearbook.